It was still pitch black outside when the young girl walked her bike out of the house. What a quiet, still early morning, with the chill of the European autumn gently seeping through her clothes. A 15-year-old girl, small and all alone, pedaling to work before the sun even came up. It was supposed to be just a normal morning like any other, but heartbreakingly, she would never make it to her destination. Her disappearance sparked one of the most baffling and haunting cold cases in Dutch legal history, a dark mystery that dragged on for nearly 2 decades. Welcome to the Knox Crime Podcast. Grab a cup of tea, take a deep breath, and settle in for a heartbreaking, haunting, yet deeply human story about the case of Nicole van den Hurk. A tumultuous childhood and family trauma. Nicole was born on the 4th of July, 1980, in a peaceful little town called Erkelenz in western Germany. Her birth name was Nicole Techtmeyer. Right from the start, her life wasn't picture perfect. Her mother, Angelica, was struggling as a single mom when she met and fell in love with a Dutchman named Ad van den Hurk. In 1983, when Nicole was 3, the family decided to leave Germany and move to the Netherlands, leaving her biological father behind in her hometown. After Angelica and Ad officially tied the knot, the little girl took her stepdad's last name, officially becoming Nicole van den Hurk. For a kid, this should have been a wonderful, fresh start. A new family, a new country, a new language, and a new life, seemingly wide open ahead of her. But life is rarely a dream. The family tragedy started with her own mother. Angelica battled increasingly severe mental health issues. Relatives remembered her locking herself in her bedroom for hours, sometimes days on end. She became withdrawn, completely isolated from the outside world, and refused any help. For a little girl who constantly craved a mother's love and protection like Nicole, oh God, the emotional distance from her biological mother became a massive, bleeding crack throughout her childhood. How can a child endure such coldness right in her own home? In 1989, when Nicole was just 8, Ad and Angelica's marriage came to an end. The court awarded custody to her stepfather. Ad, a somewhat surprising but logical decision, given Angelica's unstable mental health. Ad worked in the music industry, a job with brutal hours that often kept him out from early morning to late at night. Being a single dad was a massive challenge for him. Luckily, Ad's mother, Nicole's step-grandmother, who lived not far away in the Tungelray neighborhood of Eindhoven, became a rock for the family. She wasn't just a babysitter. She stepped into the role of a real mother. Nicole and her stepbrother, Andy van den Hurk, frequently stayed overnight and spent their weekends at her house. Andy was Ad's biological son, about 5 years older than Nicole. When Nicole was 15, Andy had just turned 20. This age gap made their dynamic pretty practical. Andy saw himself as a grown-up with his own 20-year-old life, while Nicole was still just a young teen. But deep down, they shared a roof, a sweet grandmother, and a bonded childhood. How heartwarming it was that their grandmother's house became a safe anchor, the only place that gave Nicole a true sense of belonging. Later, Ad remarried a woman named Yolanda, who also worked in the music business. With both parents so busy, the grandmother's role became even more crucial. Despite the upheaval, Nicole grew up resiliently. But a devastating blow struck in April 1995. Angelica, Nicole's biological mother, suddenly passed away in Tilburg. Though the details weren't widely publicized, reports and family confirmations indicated she had taken her own life. For Nicole, it was the ultimate shock. Can you even imagine how immense the pain must be for a 15-year-old girl? The distance between mother and daughter was now permanent, robbing her of the fragile chance to ever hug her mom again and heal those childhood wounds. So heartbreaking. By the fall of 1995, Nicole was 15, in the prime of her youth. She started spending less time at home, filling her schedule with a part-time job, dating her boyfriend, and hanging out with a close-knit group of friends. It was her way of coping with the pain, keeping busy, so she wouldn't have to think about her family tragedies. Nicole was an independent, bubbly, and vibrant girl. But if only someone had paid closer attention back then. Before the tragedy struck, there was a troubling red flag. Nicole had complained to her aunt that a strange man, someone she had never seen before, was creeping behind her and verbally harassing her while she was walking home. Tragically, no one realized how serious this warning was, and no protective measures were taken. Such a careless oversight, and it would cost a life. The fateful morning and the hopeless search. Early Friday morning, the 6th of October 1995. The autumn air in Eindhoven was crisp. Nicole woke up very early. She was working a seasonal job at a supermarket in the Wenzel shopping center, a gig that required her to be there at the crack of dawn. Just after 5 a.m., Nicole put on her coat and walked her familiar bike out of her grandmother's house in Tongleray. It was the usual route she had taken many times. No one knew that it would be the last time the little girl's silhouette would ever be seen in this world. At 6:45 a.m., the phone rang at Ad's house. It was the supermarket manager calling to say Nicole hadn't shown up for her shift. At first, the family just figured her bike broke down or she overslept. But the absence of Nicole, a girl known for being highly responsible, quickly spiraled into panic. Arriving late turned into missing work entirely, followed by a flurry of frantic calls to friends and relatives that went unanswered. Finally, the Eindhoven police were alerted. You can only imagine the suffocating dread gripping her family's hearts at that moment. The search began immediately. By 6 p.m. that same day, their worst nightmare became a reality when police officers pulled Nicole's bicycle from the Dommel River, a river that cut right across her daily commute. The bike had been completely submerged in the freezing water. Finding the bike immediately narrowed the search area. Police targeted every bridge, riverbank, riverside path, and walkway in the vicinity. For 11 straight days, from October 6 to October 17, a massive search operation was launched. Rescue teams and divers scoured the bottom of the Dommel River and the surrounding woods. The disappearance of a 15-year-old girl sent shockwaves through the whole area. A popular TV show called Deadline even organized an independent, coordinated search, bringing in sniffer dogs and volunteers to focus on the Bosvin Pot area, where many locals reported seeing something suspicious. But it all led to a dead end. On October 19, a new clue surfaced and completely flipped the investigation map. Nicole's small backpack was found tossed on a strip of land between the DAF complex and the Canaldic area, near a canal on the other side of Eindhoven. The curiosity and tension at this point must have peaked. What on earth is going on? The fact that the bike was in one place and the backpack was found far away proved one thing clearly. This was not a hit-and-run accident or a fall into the river. Someone had intervened, deliberately scattering the victim's belongings to throw the authorities off the scent. Police scoured both sides of the canal on October 20, 28, and 29, but there was still no sign of Nicole. During this time, malicious rumors began to spread that Nicole had run away due to the psychological stress of her mother's death. Some speculated she had fled back to Germany to live with her biological dad. But Ad van den Herk firmly shut down that theory. Nicole would never run away. She isn't that kind of person. This is much worse. By November 20, the police had received over 300 tips from the public, but not a single person could provide a lead on a clear suspect. The gridlock was truly suffocating. The secret under the dry branches. On Wednesday, the 22nd of November 1995, about 7 weeks after Nicole vanished, a passerby accidentally wandered into an isolated stretch of woods between Mierlo and Lierop. In a hidden spot near the edge of the road, where a few cars occasionally passed by, he made a horrifying, bizarre discovery. Hidden under a thick pile of branches and pruning waste was a human body. Oh God, it was Nicole van den Herk. This location was about 10 kilometers east of her grandmother's house, completely separate from where the bike and backpack were found. The crime scene revealed a chilling, spine-tingling truth. The killer didn't act in a state of sheer panic. He had carefully calculated the dumping site, taking the time to snap branches and gather debris to cover the young girl's body, hoping to hide her from passers-by. The timing of the discovery was a massive disadvantage for forensic science. 7 weeks of exposure to the sun and dew in the damp forest environment had caused severe decomposition. Rain, bacteria, insects, and fluctuating autumn temperatures had destroyed almost all the fragile biological evidence. The forensic technology of 1995 was still quite limited compared to modern standards, making it incredibly difficult to analyze the traces on the victim's body, and the risk of cross-contamination was sky-high. It's so infuriating how time erased so many of the monster's tracks. Even so, against all odds, experts managed to collect 3 DNA samples, 2 from her genital area and 1 from the fabric of Nicole's underwear. The autopsy report was a series of haunting details that exposed the killer's barbaric cruelty. Can you believe it? A little girl had to endure such extreme violence. The direct cause of death was severe internal bleeding from a fatal stab wound. Her jaw was fractured, and her head had multiple injuries from being struck with a blunt object. Most heartbreakingly, her fingers had multiple cuts and breaks, a gut-wrenching proof that the tiny girl had fought fiercely until her last breath to wrest her life away from the killer. It is terrifying to even imagine the sheer terror she must have gone through. Even more tragically, forensics found clear evidence that Nicole had been brutally sexually assaulted before she was killed. However, at the time, for reasons related to investigative tactics and the fact that the degraded semen samples couldn't yield a 100% complete test result, the police made a controversial decision. They kept the rape a secret and didn't release it to the press. On the 28th of November 1995, Nicole's funeral was held amid the grief of thousands. The church was packed with mourners. Thousands of musicians and artists, colleagues of Ad, flocked to the North Square in Eindhoven, carrying seas of white flowers to bid farewell to the 15-year-old girl. But behind all those tears, how bitter it was that the killer was still out there, roaming free, quietly watching everything from the shadows, lost in the investigation and the family's injustice. The Nicole van den Hurk case put an enormous amount of pressure on the Dutch police force. Hotlines were constantly overloaded, but the quality of the tips was incredibly vague. A moment once considered a breakthrough happened on the 24th of October 1995, before the body was even found. An anonymous man called the police, speaking in a frantic voice, saying he could provide the name of Nicole's killer. But before the dispatcher could ask for more details, the line suddenly went dead. The police had the recording, and by January 1996, they broadcasted the tape on national television, hoping someone would recognize the mystery voice. But it was met with total silence. Disappointment struck once again. In February 1996, a new lead seemed to light up the case. An acquaintance of the Van den Hurk family was arrested for drug trafficking. From his jail cell, this guy claimed that a criminal gang had forced him to smuggle, and that the top bosses of that gang were the ones who murdered Nicole. For a father desperate for answers like Ad, this information felt like a lifeline. He completely believed the story. However, when the police stepped in and picked apart every statement, the drug dealer's entire narrative collapsed. He was just throwing up a smokescreen to get a plea deal, yet another dead end. Listeners, can you feel the absolute gridlock here? When all external leads were blocked, the police began pointing their investigation inward, at the victim's own family. Oh, what a cruel decision. In the summer of 1996, all of Eindhoven was shocked when authorities issued arrest warrants for Ad van den Hurk, the stepdad, and Andy van den Hurk, Nicole's stepbrother. Police stormed into Andy's workplace to slap the cuffs on him. At first, the 20-year-old young man actually laughed, thinking it was a sick prank or that these were fake cops. But when the cell door slammed shut, his smile vanished. For 5 grueling days, father and son were kept in solitary confinement, interrogated relentlessly, and denied access to the press, radio, or a lawyer. The police used elimination interrogation tactics, hoping to find a crack in the stories of the 2 men closest to the victim. But they had absolutely no physical evidence, DNA, witnesses, or motive to charge them. After the 5-day limit, Ad and Andy walked out of jail as free, legally innocent men. But the court of public opinion wasn't going to let them off so easily. In a small community like Eindhoven, whispers and gossip spread fast like a plague. Articles constantly dissected the complex family dynamic of the Van den Hurks. They dug into the fact that Ad wasn't the biological dad, that Andy was just a stepbrother, and hinted that there are always crimes hidden behind the facade of a family. That unjust stigma stuck to the 2 men like a stain. A father who just lost the daughter he raised as his own flesh and blood, a brother who just lost the sister he grew up with under the same roof, now having to brace themselves against the judgment of their own neighbors. What could be more painful and unfair than that? A sense of utter helplessness enveloped the house that was once their warm home. 15 years in the dark. The years just kept slipping by. The dust of time slowly covered the thick case files labeled Nicole van den Hurk. The dedicated officers from the original investigation gradually transferred or retired. The special task force was disbanded, leaving only a few people who occasionally glanced at the yellowing documents. The case officially went cold. In 2004, an attempt to break the stalemate was made. A new cold case team was formed, and they took all the biological evidence collected in 1995 to be reanalyzed. However, the DNA technology of 2004 still wasn't sophisticated enough to decode the semen samples that had severely degraded after 7 weeks outdoors. The result was a big, fat 0. The case was tossed back into the drawer. What a brutal reality check for the victim's family. Meanwhile, the pain continued to gnaw at those left behind. Andy Vanden Hurk, unable to bear the prying eyes of his hometown and the ghostly memories of his sister, decided to leave the Netherlands. He crossed the North Sea and moved to the UK, hoping to find peace in a new land. But, deep in his subconscious, Andy never gave up the search for the truth. He constantly questioned himself, agonizing over the fact that the justice system had fallen asleep, leaving the man who raped and murdered his sister to walk free out there. That obsession, that torment, who could possibly understand it? And then Andy realized a bitter legal truth. A frozen case will only be reopened if there is a groundbreaking new piece of evidence, or if someone comes forward and confesses. And the craziest thing actually happened. A lie, traded for freedom, and the case's turning point. It was 2011, 16 years since Nicole's body was found. On a March evening, from a room in England, 36-year-old Andy Vanden Hurk did something that shocked the entire public and the European media. He logged into his personal Facebook account and wrote a short, chilling status. "I killed my stepsister, Nicole Vanden Hurk. I did it. Unbelievable. What on earth is going on?" Like a match tossed into a powder keg, the social media confession instantly triggered the security apparatuses of both the UK and the Netherlands. British police swooped in and arrested Andy immediately. On the 30th of March 2011, he was handcuffed, escorted onto a plane, and extradited back to the Netherlands. At the very same airport he had freely walked away from years ago, he now returned in the posture of a sick murderer. Dutch police threw Andy in a cell once again. The interrogation lasted exactly 5 days, just like what happened in the summer of 1996. But this time there was one core difference. Investigators found absolutely zero physical evidence, no fingerprints, and no DNA links that matched Andy. Aside from a Facebook post, he was completely innocent. They had no choice but to let him go. The moment he stepped out of the police station, Andy immediately retracted his confession. He gave a wry smile, declaring he never killed his sister. To dial up the drama even more, he went on to accuse his own father Ad of being the real killer. Of course, given the insane inconsistencies and total lack of evidence, this accusation was also dismissed, and no one was charged. Outsiders looking in all thought Andy had lost his mind. But oh, little did they know, behind that grand charade was a cold, desperate calculation steeped in boundless love. Andy knew criminal law and legal proceedings very well. He understood that to verify a murder confession, the police would be forced to reboot the entire system. Authorities would have to form a new cold case team, and most importantly, to get evidence to cross-check his confession, they would be forced to exhume Nicole's body to extract new DNA samples and analyze them using today's most cutting-edge technology. He set fire to his own honor, his dignity, and his freedom, just to light a path to justice. A life-or-death chess move. A sacrifice so profound it brings tears to your eyes. Andy was playing a game of Russian roulette with the legal system. If the police looked for an excuse to force a confession, or if the system moved too fast, he was at total risk of being sentenced to life for a crime he didn't commit. But to him, that was still better than living the rest of his life in helplessness. It wasn't until 2016 that Andy revealed his true motive to the press. "I wanted her to be exhumed and to get her DNA tested. I set a trap for myself, and things could have gone horribly wrong. But for her to be exhumed, I had to put the chess pieces in the right places. I went to the police and said I did it. She is my sister. Absolutely, I miss her every day." And the brothers' crazy plan worked brilliantly, truly astounding. In September 2011, under public and legal pressure, the Dutch authorities officially exhumed Nicole's grave. The Netherlands Forensic Institute, NFI, began re-examining all the biological material, clothing, and lingering traces. The DNA samples that were deemed beyond saving back in 1995 were now fed into the world's most advanced molecular genetic scanners and analysis systems. After the exhumation was complete, the police also issued an official statement, breaking their 16-year silence. They confirmed to the public that Nicole van den Hurk had indeed been brutally raped before she died. The heartbreaking truth was finally out. The reward for information leading to the killer's arrest was bumped up to €15,000. Over 20 new leads poured in, and this time, science spoke up. New forensic traces and the monster is revealed. In late 2011, after months of tireless analysis, the Netherlands Forensic Institute announced a breakthrough result. Using the new tech, they successfully extracted 3 completely distinct DNA profiles from the mixture of semen and pubic hair stuck to Nicole's remains and underwear. The first profile belonged to Nicole's high school boyfriend. This was totally explainable based on their consensual romantic relationship at the time, and he was quickly cleared as a suspect. The second profile belonged to a completely unknown male, never registered in the national database. But the third profile, and the most crucial piece of the puzzle, pointed straight to a man already in the National Criminal Registry, Jos de Jaes, also referred to by the Dutch press as Jos de Jaes, or Jos de Graaf. Jos de Jaes's DNA was found not just in the sperm but also on the pubic hairs left on the victim's body. But what sent shivers down the police's spines wasn't just the biological match. It was the flawless match in the modus operandi, method of operation. Jos de Jaes was a predator with the viciousness of a wild beast. Born in 1968, at the time Nicole was killed, 1995, he was 27. His past was a chronicle of violence. His first run-in with the law was in 1987, when he was just 19 for a violent assault, just months after serving a 17-month sentence for abusing his girlfriend. He fell right back into his old ways. In 2000, in the town of Valkenswaard, just south of Eindhoven, Jos de Jaes committed a horrific crime. He ambushed a 20-year-old woman riding her bike, violently yanked her off, dragged her into a secluded area, and brutally raped her. This scenario was identical in every single detail to what happened to Nicole van den Hurk early that morning in 1995. A young girl, a bicycle, a deserted location, and a sexual assault. This coincidence would give anyone goosebumps. On top of that, his criminal record noted at least 2 more instances of abusing his ex-girlfriend right in their own home. In 2011, a court ordered him to be held for 3 years for mandatory psychiatric treatment. In his psychological evaluation reports, a psychiatrist described Jos de Jaes using a chilling phrase, a vessel filled with hate. The doctor warned that his risk of reoffending was extremely high if he wasn't closely monitored. Yet, alas, despite that dark track record, the Dutch legal system proved to be incredibly lenient. In January 2014, Jos de Jaes was living in a halfway house in Helmond, preparing to reintegrate into society. He was even playing goalie for the amateur soccer club RKVV. He was exactly 6 weeks away from living a totally free life. Luckily, the claws of justice grabbed him right before that moment. That was a close call. On the 5th of October, 1995, the night before Nicole disappeared, Jos de Jaes had a fierce argument with his ex-girlfriend and stormed out of the house in a rage. Hours later, in a frenzy of madness and misogyny, he prowled around the Eindhoven area and spotted Nicole riding her bike alone in the dark. The beast had found his prey. In January 2014, police officially raided the halfway house and arrested 46-year-old Jos de Jaes. When he heard the news, Andy van den Hurk, the brother who sacrificed everything, choked back tears and texted his friends. They finally got this monster after 19 years. A text message carrying the weight of 19 long, agonizing years of choked-back tears, the lingering legal battle and shameless defenses. In April 2014, the Dutch Public Prosecution Service officially charged Jos de Jaes with 2 crimes, rape and murder. Nearly 20 years after the day Nicole was buried under those dry branches, the killer's name was finally brought to light. He had been in the database all along, just waiting for science to call his name. However, the courtroom battle turned out to be another horrific mental torture for the victim's family. It was just too cruel. Right from the pre-trial hearing in July 2014 in Den Bosch, Prosecutors were forced to drop the murder charge and replace it with manslaughter, arguing that the forensic evidence at the scene wasn't enough to prove premeditated intent to kill. The Van den Herk family was furious. Andy fiercely criticized this decision as a betrayal of justice. He argued that strangling and stabbing the victim and then going out of his way to transport the body 10 kilometers to hide it under a pile of branches was a calculated sequence of actions meant to take a life and cover up a crime. That is clearly murder. Ad Van den Herk also broke down in tears before the press. This guy deserves the highest punishment possible. He tried to kill 2 women in the past and took my child's life. The Netherlands gains nothing by letting a guy like him continue walking the streets. The gut-wrenching words of a father would make anyone's heart ache. In court, prosecutors asked for a 14-year prison sentence. Standing at the defendant's podium, Joost de Geus's defense attorney, Jaap Knoester, displayed extreme cunning, aiming for a full acquittal. Joost de Geus's testimony changed constantly, creating a thick fog of confusion. First, he swore he had never met or known Nicole. When cornered by the DNA evidence, he changed his tune. Maybe we had consensual sex a few days before she died. I just don't remember clearly. Attorney Knoester chimed in, clinging to the fact that there was a third unknown man's DNA on the victim's body. He ruthlessly spouted arguments to smear the 15-year-old girl's character, suggesting Nicole was easy, sleeping around with multiple men, and even baselessly hypothesizing that she might have been pregnant when she was killed. The absolute heights of shamelessness. Faced with the ultimate insult to his daughter's spirit, Ad suppressed his rage and declared, "These are just lawyer tricks. He is ultimately just playing devil's advocate. I don't want to comment. Let the Justice Department do their job." The core of the debate, spanning 8 pre-trial hearings, was the reliability of the DNA test. Because the semen had degraded outside for 6 weeks, Joost de Geus's DNA sample on Nicole's body was a partial match, mixed with her boyfriend's and the unknown man's DNA. The Netherlands Forensic Institute, NFI, and the Independent Forensic Services, IFS, debated fiercely. To settle it, the court had to send the samples all the way to New Zealand, using probabilistic genotyping computer software. The results from New Zealand came back like a sledgehammer. The odds of those 3 DNA strands belonging to Joost de Geus and 2 others, rather than 3 completely random strangers, were 2.28 million to 1. In other words, that trace was 99.999% his. However, certainty in science and beyond a reasonable doubt in law are 2 different things. The defense attorney used the third unknown DNA trace to cling on. Who knows? Maybe that third guy was the one who killed Nicole after my client had sex with her. On the 21st of November 2016, the trial panel dealt a fatal blow to the family's faith. The court unanimously convicted Joost de Geus of rape and sentenced him to 5 years in prison. But, for manslaughter, he was fully acquitted. What the hell is this? A sentence like a sick joke, rubbing salt in the family's wounds. The court's reasoning was that they couldn't rule out the possibility that the third unknown guy had a hand in the girl's death. Furthermore, since he had already served 2 years in pre-trial detention, he only had 3 years left in prison for brutally raping a 15-year-old girl. The court also declined to issue a TBS psychiatric detention order. Sobs and furious screams echoed through the courtroom. Nicole's stepmother, Jolanda, wailed in despair. "What if this happened to your children? This is absurd. Unbelievable." She was escorted out by police while her resentment boiled over. The next day, appearing on television, Ad bitterly said, "He is not human. He is a disgusting creature." The final verdict and the value of justice. Refusing to let the case end in such a ridiculous and unjust manner, on the 29th of November 2016, the Public Prosecution Service officially appealed, demanding a retrial for all charges. In August 2018, the Court of Appeal in the city of 's-Hertogenbosch reopened the trial. This time, the judges took a much sharper and more realistic view. The appellate court officially dismissed the significance of the third unknown DNA trace, concluding it was just a microscopic speck. Its origin couldn't be determined, and it could very well have been environmental cross-contamination. With the final obstacle removed, the appellate court drew an undeniable logical line. Joost de Geus ambushed, raped, killed, and personally transported the 15-year-old girl's body deep into the woods to silence her. That is the behavior of a single perpetrator. All defenses of consensual sex were thrown in the trash. On the 9th of October 2018, the Court of Appeal officially convicted Hostejeus on both counts, rape and manslaughter. This time, the sentence was increased to 12 years in prison. The presiding judge used ironclad words. The defendant forced a young girl, with her whole bright future ahead of her, to endure a brutal rape and then ruthlessly killed her, burying her under the branches. Hostejeus stubbornly appealed to the Supreme Court of the Netherlands, Hogerad, citing he didn't receive a fair trial. But on the 16th of June 2020, the Supreme Court rejected all of his complaints. However, because the case had dragged on for so long in the judicial system, the court decided to reduce his sentence by 4 months. The final permanent sentence was set at 11 years and 8 months in prison. Less than 12 years for a life, a future, and a destroyed family? It is a bitter irony. A mere slap on the wrist that exposes the laxity and absurdly excessive humanitarianism of the Dutch criminal justice system. But legally speaking, the case was officially closed. Nearly a quarter of a century after the day little Nicole walked her bike out of the house, the killer's name was finally called out, and he was made to pay behind bars. Wounds that never heal. However, there are court rulings that can never close the wounds of the heart. The case ended, the law spoke, but the price paid for the truth was far too expensive and cruel for those left behind. Andy van den Hurk, the young man who gritted his teeth and turned himself into a murderer, gambling with his freedom and honor to force the justice system to wake up, was completely depleted. Reading this, my heart truly breaks. The span of over 20 years living with the pain of losing his sister, being suspected by the community, sacrificing his youth to pursue justice, and dealing with immense psychological pressure, wrung out every last drop of vitality in his soul. That great brother helped unmask the monster, but he couldn't heal himself. On the 27th of August 2021, Andy left a final message on his personal Facebook page, saying he was too tired and ready to say goodbye to this world. A few days later, he took his own life. Andy's death is a tragedy piled upon tragedy, an incredibly haunting and deeply sorrowful end to the Nicole van den Hurk case. He was the sole reason the killer was caught, yet, oh God, he couldn't continue living in the very world he helped bring justice to. Stepfather Ad van den Hurk now carries the heavy burden of 2 graves on his shoulders. One for a 15-year-old daughter robbed of her future, and one for a 46-year-old son who collapsed under the weight of the past. Even if the 11-year, 8-month sentence might not satisfy those thirsting for adequate punishment, the truth remains the truth. The darkness cannot hide the crime forever. And in another world, I believe that maybe Nicole van den Hurk is smiling and proudly hugging her brother, the man who lit the brightest torch from the very fire that burned his own life, just to bring her back from the dark. A story that closes with so many tears, but also shines brightly with sacred family love. Thank you for joining us on the Knox Crime Podcast, and see you in the next cases.